Good morning. Welcome. My name is Mark Hurl. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees here at the Mainline Unitarian Church. It's great to have you with us this morning, whether here or online. A reminder to all to kindly silence your cell phones while I introduce today's worship team. Our ministerial intern, Caroline Bright, our worship associate, Bob Barker, and the music for today will be performed by Jazz Sanctuary. We are Unitarian Universalists, gathering in a loving community of faith to support one another as we search for meaning and purpose, working together to bring compassion, equity, and responsible stewardship to the world we all share. We affirm religious freedom and celebrate diversity, as all are inherently worthy and dignified. Wherever you are, whomever you love, whatever your journey or personal circumstance, you are welcome here. An especially warm greeting to those who are visiting us today. Please join us after the service for coffee and tea in the fireside room across the hall, and please take advantage of the welcome table in the atrium, our homepage, mluc.org, and our new MLUC app. Now, please join me in giving voice to our mission statement. Together, we transform lives through love, service, and our welcoming faith.
In the opening lines of Mending Wall, Robert Frost writes, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast." As we light our chalice this morning, may we consider how we can be more like the thawing ground of spring, to heave at the walls that divide us and to break them down. We now invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing the opening hymn. It is hymn number 346, "Come Sing a Song with Me." The words are also projected on the screen behind me.
The glee I feel in singing that hymn with this incredible jazz group. How lucky are we this morning? Oh my goodness. So, as you might have noticed, if you've looked over this order of service thoroughly, there is a theme for today, and that theme is Canada. No, I did not pick that because we have snow for the first time in forever, or because it's cold, but, well, you'll find out why. However, it occurred to me that not everyone who's here today might be as familiar with Canadian culture, right? It's a different culture fundamentally. Don't worry, I'll get into that later. But this video and this song that you are about to see provides a nice little primer on a number of Canadian things that you should know about. It is performed by Chris Hadfield, who is a Canadian retired astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, musician, and writer. He has flown 2 space shuttle missions and served as the commander of the International Space Station. His brother Dave is also a pilot, and he's a musician, sailor, and writer. And we are going to hear from the Hadfield brothers as they perform their song In Canada.
Canada, What's with Canada? We got great big cities, but a lot of trees and rocks. Yeah, the winter's cold here. Wear 2 pairs of socks. There's half the world's fresh water to paddle your canoe or camp along the shoreline. It's what we like to do in Canada. Ooh, I'm living in Canada. Float my boat in Canada. Oh, bait my hook in Canada. We tend to do things different. We each have our routine. Some of us eat kubasa, some of us poutine.
Oh, j'aime poutine.
But we have traditions that help us stick together. Our milk comes in a bag and mosquitoes eat at leisure. Playing in a snowsuit, the true north strong and free. Hockey night on Saturday, there on CBC.
Or now on Sportsnet.
In Canada. Center ice in Canada.
Coming to you coast to coast.
He shoots, he scores in Canada. Oh, I'm a player in Canada. We pronounce the letter R like we're pirates on a ship. And we'll drive 2,000 miles for a summer camping trip. We wear sorels in winter while plugging in the car. We eat the holes from donuts. We love Nanaimo bars. And we do possess a word that lubricates our speech. It's pretty good, eh?
Pretty good, eh?
And it's always within reach in Canada. How's it going in Canada? Out and about in Canada. Oh, drop your G in Canada. Oh, I've slept out in a forest, scared I heard a bear. I've climbed a rocky mountain just because it's there. Crossed the great St. Lawrence, said merci beaucoup. Pardon me, I'm sorry. Excuse me. And to you in Canada, politely in Canada, right up here in Canada. Oh, you don't butt in Canada. Every city empties on the 24th of May.
Queen's birthday.
And if we say not bad,
Not bad.
we're better than okay.
Not bad.
There's workman's comp and pogey for when we're shown the door. There's Canadian Tire money in at least one kitchen drawer. And we have a golden rule that runs between these shores. You stay out of my face, I'll stay out of yours. In Canada, get along in Canada. Kiss the cod in Canada. Oh, the friendly giant in Canada. Ooh, oh, 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 Canada.
Bonne fête, Canada. Happy Canada Day from the Hadfield family.
Right? So our kids today, we will sing you out, but just a reminder for our 4th and 5th grade OWL students, you'll be heading to the McGinnis room as you trot off to your classes. So I now invite all of our children and our teachers to head off and have some fun, and we will sing you out. 2, 3.
Each month, MLUC selects an offering outreach partner, a local charity with whom we share half of what we collect during our Sunday service offering. This partner, recipient of MLUC's February offering outreach, is the Pet Adoption and Life Care Society, or PALS. It is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the well-being of animals. They place over 300 cats into loving homes every year. The animals are temporarily cared for in foster homes until they can be adopted into new homes. Pets receive veterinary care, including vaccinations and testing, and are spayed or neutered. PALS is a true no-kill organization. PALS is funded through donations and by the proceeds of the Black Cat Cafe in Devon, which is mostly run by volunteers. MLUC's donations will go toward the veterinary fund, which provides care for the animals until they are adopted. The organization aligns with our 7th UU principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. If you wish to make a donation online, follow the instructions that you see on the screen behind me. If you are in the sanctuary and would like to make a cashless donation, you can scan the QR code that is on the order of service. The offering will now be gratefully received.
As has become our practice at Mainline Unitarian Church, the ushers will now bring forward the gifts that you have given, at least the physical ones, those of you who weren't using the QR code. And I invite you to join me in our affirmation of gratitude. The words are in your program or on the screen. Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for all those who share their gifts, for we are enriched by their giving. And let us be grateful even for our needs, so that we may learn from the generosity of others. Thanks, Bill.
Candles of Community is MLUC's ritual of personal sharing and support in a trusted and safe environment. After each candle is lit, you may say along with me, "We hold you in our hearts." The first candle today is lit for all those who are suffering, homeless, starving, and dying in the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine, and at the borders of our own country. For all of these, we hold you in our hearts. I would like to light a candle of concern and loss for the deaths of two old friends, James DeLong and Christopher Candy, both geologists with whom I worked for many years. For James and Christopher, their families, their friends, we hold you in our hearts. Finally, for all those joys and concerns that are held close, some too deep for words, we light an additional candle. Know that we hold you in our hearts. The reading today comes from my time working in the Arctic barrens of northern Canada some 50-odd years ago. He put down his pencil and stood up. It was late in the summer, and the nights were dark again. He stepped out of the large tent that was his summer home, and he turned off the generator. In an instant, the cold night descended into darkness and silence. But as he looked up at the stars, the night sky exploded with the aurora borealis. Great balls of light raced across the sky from one horizon to the other. Waving curtains of red and green and white appeared, moved, disappeared, and appeared again. It was a light show, the likes of which he had never seen. And he felt tiny, insignificant. He stood, shivering, watching, until in the silence he could hear the sound of the northern lights. They spoke to him. Gradually, he began to feel at one with the universe around him. When he could stand the cold no more, he retreated to the tent, crawled into his sleeping bag, waited for the sound to recede, and slept at peace.
Before I officially begin the sermon, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that today was, in fact, our own Robert Barker's very first time as a worship associate, and I just wanted to give him a round of applause. It was incredibly fortuitous when we started planning this service, and I was like, oh, it's going to be about Canada writing, which is amazing. So, when Joel and I were engaged, we talked about all of the important things that you need to discuss before you marry someone. finances, career goals, which way the toilet paper roll should go, and most importantly, how we wanted to raise our future kids. Pretty obviously, they would be Unitarian Universalists. We knew we wanted to practice gentle parenting in a way that aligns with scientific and evidence-based practices. And of course, we negotiated which sports teams they would root for. Look, our children can explore whatever spiritual path or journey they want to, and I look forward to learning more about their various identities as they grow. But what their team affiliations will be, that's from birth and they don't get a choice. For baseball, I was fine with them cheering for the Phillies first. Okay. My family's Toronto Blue Jays will always have 1993, and my kids can be Phillies fans. That's okay. Neither Joel nor I have strong feelings about football, but they're Philly born and raised, so they are Eagles fans. But when it came to hockey, I drew a line in the ice. Any child of mine would grow up a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. Sure, does that mean that the closest they're going to come to a Stanley Cup is when they steal my oversized water tumbler? Maybe, probably. But being a Leafs fan is about loyalty, no matter how many times we're knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. Betsy, Toby, and now baby 3 will be the 5th generation in our family to inevitably have their hearts broken by the team. But to be a Bright is to cheer for the Maple Leafs. These kids have gotten my name, my hair, and by gosh, they'll get my hockey affiliations. For many Canadians, hockey is an intrinsic part of our culture and our stories. That's right, I said our. The rumors are true. Je suis Canadien. I am a dual citizen of the US and Canada, as are both of my parents. My Canadian identity has always been a complex but critical part of who I am. What does it mean if I've lived longer in the United Kingdom or Indonesia than in a country where I'm a citizen? What does it mean if my rudimentary Spanish stays sharper than my embarrassingly limited French? What does it mean to be an American, but to also be a person who has a monarch? And it's King Charles. Well, that makes me not all that unusual. In the 2021 census, 3.7 million Canadians, over 11% of the population, reported having multiple citizenships, and hundreds of thousands of Canadians live abroad. Canada's present and history are complex and interesting, but it's a history I didn't know much about until my first year seminar at St. Lawrence University. I was sorted into a class called Famous Dead Canadians. I was one of only 3 living Canadians in the class, and I was the only one who'd grown up outside of Canada. It was in this class that I first learned about Louis Riel. Tomorrow, here in the US, we'll celebrate the federal holiday of President's Day with closed post offices, sales, and for some, time off from work. Meanwhile, in Canada, some provinces will be celebrating Family Day, some Heritage Day, one Islander Day, or in Manitoba, they will be celebrating Louis Riel Day. Riel died 139 years ago, but he remains one of Canada's most controversial, most studied, and most discussed historical figures. Among other things, he was one of the founders of the province of Manitoba, and he was a political leader of the Métis. The Métis are an Indigenous people whose historical homelands include Canada's 3 prairie provinces, as well as parts of British Columbia, the Northwest Territories, Northwest Ontario, and the Northern United States. They have a shared history and culture deriving from specific mixed European and Indigenous ancestry, which became distinct through ethnogenesis in the mid-18th century during the early years of the North American fur trade. In Canada, the Métis, with a population of over 624,000, are one of 3 major groups of Indigenous peoples that were legally recognized by the Constitution Act of 1982. The other 2 groups being First Nations and Inuit. The professor I had for Famous Dead Canadians summed up Canadian history as one long fight between people who speak English and people who speak French. He was not wrong. The story of Louis Riel and his legacy is a perfect example of that. At the time of his birth in the Red River settlement, Rial was born into a territory administered by the Hudson's Bay Company. Ah, a company, you think? Ah, like a coal town. The HBC had control of Rupert's Land for 200 years, from 1670 to 1870, an area of over 1,490,900 square miles. Over a third of modern-day Canada was controlled by a single company. By the time Rial was born in 1844, Rupert's Land was largely populated by French-speaking, typically Catholic, Métis, and other First Nations peoples, but administered and run by the white, typically Protestant, typically English-speaking employees of the Hudson's Bay Company. As a young man, Rial was sent across the country to Montreal to train to be a Catholic priest, which ended abruptly when his father died suddenly. As he grieved, Rial suffered what was likely a psychotic break and entered into a period of disconnection with reality. He experienced delusions that were coupled with religious fervor. By the time he was 22, he returned home to the Red River settlement, and Rial found that religious, nationalistic, and racial tensions were exacerbated by an influx of Anglophone Protestant settlers from Ontario. In 1867, Canadian Confederation took place. Canada was officially a country, a federation of provinces and territories. And the first big challenge to the newly formed nation was the 1869 Red River Rebellion led by 25-year-old Rial. In 1870, the Parliament of Canada passed the Manitoba Act, allowing the Red River Colony to enter the Confederation as the province of Manitoba following the uprising. The act also incorporated some of Rial's demands, such as provision of separate French schools for Métis children and the protection of Catholicism. However, it was the second conflict Rial spearheaded that would ultimately lead to his execution: the Northwest Rebellion or Resistance of 1885. Rial had been invited to lead the movement of protest, but he turned it into a military action with a heavily religious tone. That alienated Catholic clergy, white settlers, most indigenous tribes, and some Métis, but he had the allegiance of 200 armed Métis, a smaller number of other indigenous warriors, at Batoche in 1885, who confronted 900 Canadian militia. At the time, that was the Canadian Army, and some local residents. Rial was captured, put on trial, and convicted of treason. Despite many pleas across Canada for clemency, he was hanged. Rial became a heroic martyr to Francophone Canada. Rial's conviction, execution, and the refusal of Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, to commute his sentence cemented the fundamental distrust of Anglophone politicians for the French-speaking population. In Quebec and for other French speakers across Canada, Anglos were not, and in many ways still are not, to be trusted, which frankly makes sense. A quick summary of Canadian history is also a quick summary of centuries of subjugation of French speakers by English speakers, from the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759 through the ongoing separatist movement of the Parti Québécois today. When I first learned about Rial's story from an academic perspective, I was struck by how similar in many ways it was to the story of colonization and the subjugation of indigenous tribes in the United States. But in some ways, it is fundamentally different. The culture of white Anglo-Protestant colonizing culture is one we know well throughout American history. What fascinated me was the culture of the Métis was discovered to be and treated as distinct from both white culture and First Nations culture and identity. One of the layers of this is that Canadians have been reckoning more and more in recent years with the legacy of the Canadian residential school system, which was based on the American boarding or residential school system. In Canada, as in the US, the system was created to isolate Indigenous children from the influence of their own culture and religion in order to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian culture. Over the course of the system's more than 100-year existence, around 150,000 children were placed in residential schools nationally. It harmed Indigenous children significantly by removing them from their families, depriving them of their ancestral languages, and exposing many of them to physical and sexual abuse. Conditions in the school led to student malnutrition, starvation, disease, and death. Students were also subjected to forced enfranchisement as assimilated citizens that removed their legal identities as Indians, disconnection from their family and culture, and forced to speak English or French. Students often graduated being unable to fit into their communities, but remaining subject to racist attitudes in mainstream Canadian society. Starting in the late 2000s, Canadian politicians and religious communities have begun to recognize and issue apologies for their respective roles in the residential school system. On June 1st, 2008, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was established to uncover the truth about the schools. In 2015, the TRC concluded with the establishment of the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and released a report that concluded that the school system amounted to cultural genocide. Ongoing efforts since 2021 have identified thousands of possible unmarked graves on the grounds of former residential schools, though no human remains have been exhumed. In 2022, the House of Commons unanimously passed a motion calling on the federal Canadian government to recognize the residential school system as genocide. As explained in the executive summary of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's final report, underlying these arguments was the belief that the colonizers were bringing civilization to savage people who could never civilize themselves, a belief of racial and cultural superiority. Sound familiar to any Americans here? In the United States, we struggle to reckon with these complicated and dark pieces of our own history, and looking to the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission model could give us steps to follow to address them. Right here in this congregation, we can find ways to recognize and engage with the Indigenous peoples whose land we are on, who had land taken from them and their culture intentionally erased. Just last year, our children and youth learned about the Lenape language and worked to incorporate it into signs and acknowledgments around the MLUC property. It's a small gesture, but ensuring that work like that is prominently and importantly displayed helps us to show what our values are, especially when our children are the ones leading the way. Another story that might sound familiar to many of us here, in 1961, the Canadian Unitarian Council was founded to bring together Unitarians and Universalists who would join the Unitarian Universalist Association from Canada. Between 1961 and 2002, almost all member congregations of the Canadian Unitarian Council were also members of the UUA, and most services to congregations in Canada were provided by the UUA. However, in 2002, the CUC formally became a separate entity from the UUA, although the UUA continues to provide ministerial settlement services. If you're visiting, we love an acronym. At the time, the Canadian Unitarian Council newsletter shared the entertaining perspective that an upcoming meeting of the UUA would actually be held in Quebec, the province known for repeatedly trying to separate from the rest of Canada. Now, 22 years after that separation, Canadian congregations are listed on our ministerial search board as related organizations. The refusal to be assimilated into American culture or institutions is as old as Canada itself. Canadians understand that their history and culture is separate and distinct from American culture. But I don't think most Americans understand how different from the USA Canada really is. Sure, we have overlaps, especially regionally. I once told Joel that one of the reasons I could stay in Philly is because, if nothing else, it is a hockey town. One of the most fundamentally American identity concepts is the idea that our great nation is a melting pot of people and cultures from all over the world. People come from everywhere and blend into what it means to be American. In Canada, learning from past mistakes, the metaphor I've heard often is a salad bowl instead. The idea that different people bring different things that remain distinct, but together make a great combined effort. That's Canadian multiculturalism. In this metaphor, the salad dressing is obviously hockey and maple syrup. Another integral part of Canadian culture is humor. Well, humor, H-U-M-O-U-R, which when I say it, you can't tell that I'm adding the extra U and spelling it the Canadian way, but I know everybody in this room appreciates an extra U, so I had to put it in there. Canadian humor is characterized by irony, parody, and satire. Is it any coincidence that the founder of Saturday Night Live, Lorne Michaels, is Canadian? Or that our own beloved UU Hysterical Society was founded by Canadian Liz James? I don't think so. Americans often have a healthy appreciation for Canadian comedians and humor, but few Americans can imitate the gently self-deprecating, ironic hilarity of a Canadian comic. As a note, when it comes to Canadian performers, Canadians are morally and legally obligated to point out to you that so-and-so is Canadian. Ryan Reynolds and Ryan Gosling? Yes, they're both Canadian. I could go on, but that would add a lot to this sermon. I won't do it to you. As Unitarian Universalists, one of our most beloved and sacred principles is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As UUs, we are encouraged to engage in meaning-making from many sources of inspiration. Some might be expected, like religious texts, poetry, music, or meditation. Some can be less expected. For me, and I know for many of you here, that can often involve learning about things we never imagined we'd be interested in, like Louis Riel and what makes Canada culturally distinct from the United States. Intercultural experiences and learning have been some of the most critical parts of my lifelong search for meaning and in understanding what truth can be. Growing up in a multi-layered cultural identity, even when those cultures are sometimes incorrectly assumed to be the same, has shaped who I am and how I am in the world. I often tell people I'm not 50% American and 50% Canadian, I am 200%, because I am all of both. Except during the Winter Olympics when I am legally required to only be Canadian when a gold medal in hockey is on the line. Holding complexities like that in community can be one of the hardest things we do as Unitarian Universalists. How can we simultaneously be atheists and theists and humanists together in one place of worship? How can we create space where everyone has a chance to feel included? How can we help each other change and grow while embracing things that are wonderful just the way they are? Well, we can. We can be 200%. We don't have to choose between. We don't have to be a melting pot. We can be a salad bowl, where the cucumbers can be cucumbers, and the tomatoes can be tomatoes, and the agnostics can be agnostics, and the pagans can be pagans. And the dressing on this salad is love and our shared principles that guide us. Our values are what makes the disparate pieces of this community come together into one colorful, tasty, unexpected place to be. It's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. But being more than the sum of our parts is always worth it. And maybe, just maybe, we can add some maple syrup on top. And now I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing along with Jazz Sanctuary to our closing hymn. It's number 1050 in the Teal hymnal, Jazz Alleluia. will see in the near future. But I have faith in all of you and in the Toronto Maple Leafs that you will go forth into the world and make a difference, considering new information, new ideas, and the best way that we can all be together in our separate salad components, but in the same bowl that is this community. And I invite you to remain seated for our postlude performed by the incredible Jazz Sanctuary. Take it away, boys. Always wanted to say that.